Welcome to our National Nonprofit Day event, and thank you for joining us for the second installment of our Secretary of State Nonprofit Educational Series. My name is Betsy Bogart, and I am Chief of the Business Programs Division of the California Secretary of State. We recognize the importance of what you do and appreciate you taking the time to attend this educational workshop today. All of you make a difference. You that have a nonprofit, desire to start a nonprofit, or simply want to better educate yourself to help others. We have an informative workshop scheduled for you today with subject matter experts from the Internal Revenue Service, the California Franchise Tax Board, the California Employment Development Department, the California Department of Justice, Office of the Attorney General, and from our very own experts within the California Secretary of State's Business Programs Division. To kick us off, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our California Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber.
Thank you, Betsy, and good morning to everyone. It is truly my honor to be with you today. And I want to thank our Business Program Division and our outreach teams for putting together this very important event. It has been a vision of mine and a hope that someday we would be regularly providing these kinds of workshops and seminars for those who do business in California. It became apparent to me when doing COVID, and I had so many friends who were concerned about their nonprofit, not being able to get out and to do the work that they normally do, and not understanding how to maintain a nonprofit status. And so when I became Secretary of State and talked and we actually opened up again, I spoke with our BizFile and said, listen, those in the area, I said, we need to do some work to give people information, because I had several churches contacting me saying that they believe their nonprofit status had lapsed during COVID, and it went on and on. And so we decided that, who better to give you the information than the Secretary of State's office and all of our partners who do that. We strive daily to make it easier in California to do business. And in the United States, there are really nearly 2 million registered nonprofit organizations. And interestingly enough, of course, in California being the largest state, but there's 2 million as nationwide, we are 250,000 of those individuals who operate in California as nonprofits. From our labor organizations to supporting homeless ownership, as well as promoting civic engagement, assisting families, working with vulnerable populations, and it goes on and on. Our nonprofits positively impact millions of lives each and every day. The work that nonprofit organizations engage in does not even is not going unnoticed by me or by my office. We are constantly looking for ways to engage with you, streamline the procedures and filings, and make it much more accessible. We're looking for innovation, and providing the best customer service continues to be a goal of ours, and to make sure that you have access to all the information that you need. I'm exactly very proud today that we are being joined by some of the major organizations in the state. Not only do you have access to the Secretary of State's individuals, but you're being joined by your state and federal colleagues who are here to provide you with important information on how our agencies interface with each other, and in order to provide you with the necessary tools to be successful as a nonprofit in California. I want to thank you all for attending today's event. There are a lot of you that are going to be online. There's going to be some amazing information that will be shared. I want to thank, obviously, our staff who worked very hard to put this on, and thank them for inviting me to be here. I want to thank IRS and EDT and the Federal Franchise Tax Board and the Attorney General's Office, all of them working on your behalf to make sure that you're able to function successfully as a nonprofit in California. So once again, thank you so very much for attending. We look forward to the many, many more opportunities that we have to serve you and share the information. Thanks to the staff who has done so much work in bringing this together. And so, Betsy, once again, thank you, and back to you and those who are running this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary. Appreciate your time this morning. As I mentioned, we have a full schedule this morning packed with informative content from our experts. We have scheduled time at the end of the workshop to answer as many questions as we can. All questions must be asked using the Zoom question and answer feature found in the bottom middle of your screen. If at any time during the workshop you have a question surrounding the information being shared, type your question in the Zoom Q&A feature. Please be concise and also include which agency you are directing your question. Be mindful that our presenters will not be providing legal advice nor addressing entity-specific concerns today. This webinar is intended to provide general educational information only. So without further ado, let's get started with our first set of speakers. Representing the California Secretary of State's Business Programs Division, please welcome Chris Bailey and Katie Connors.
Thank you, Betsy, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's National Nonprofit Day webinar. My name is Chris Bailey, and I work in the Business Entity Review section at the California Secretary of State. I'm here today to share some information with you about the different types of nonprofit corporate entities which can be filed, as well as provide information on how to file articles of incorporation, amendments, and terminations. So we'll start at the beginning. What is a nonprofit? Typically, a nonprofit corporation in California is organized for charitable, public, religious, or mutual benefit purposes rather than for the purpose of making profit. To start a nonprofit corporation, you'll need to seek legal advice to determine which nonprofit entity type best suits your purpose. Select that nonprofit entity type and file articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State. Articles of incorporation for each nonprofit entity type can be filed online through your BizFile Online account for faster processing. We will drop the link to the BizFile Online homepage in the chat. Just note you'll need to log into your BizFile Online account to submit filings online. And when filing online articles of incorporation for a nonprofit entity, do not attach your bylaws, your entity constitution, any drafted articles, or any document you would submit to any tax authority. The form you complete through BizFile Online contains all necessary information to incorporate your nonprofit entity, and the inclusion of additional documents could result in processing delays due to the filing being returned, so that those additional documents can be removed. On the next slide here, we'll discuss the three types of nonprofit corporate entities which can be filed. First, we have a public benefit, which is a type of nonprofit organized primarily or exclusively for social, educational, recreational, or charitable purposes, which benefits the general public rather than the interest of its members. A public benefit is eligible for tax-exempt status under Internal Revenue Codes 501c3 and 501c4. And some examples of a public benefit include a scholarship fund, a homeless shelter, and groups which fundraise for other nonprofits or initiatives. A religious nonprofit is a type of nonprofit organized to operate a church or to otherwise operate primarily for religious purposes. A religious nonprofit is also eligible for tax-exempt status under Internal Revenue Codes 501c3 and c4. And some examples of a religious nonprofit include a church, a mosque, or a faith-based organization with missions based on religious values. And finally, we have a mutual benefit, which is a type of nonprofit organized for a purpose other than religious, charitable, or public benefit, which is planning to obtain tax-exempt status under provisions other than Internal Revenue Codes 501c3 and c4, or is not planning to obtain tax-exempt status at all. A nonprofit mutual benefit stands apart from other nonprofit entity types in that its mission is to serve its members rather than the general public. And some examples of a mutual benefit nonprofit include a motorcycle club or other shared interest club, chambers of commerce, fraternities, or professional associations. Now, the articles of incorporation for all nonprofit entity types are located on the Forms page of BizFile Online under the Nonprofit Corporations Initial Filings section of documents. So next, on the next slide, we'll review the types of amendments that are available to nonprofit entities, as well as how to terminate a nonprofit entity. But first, a quick note regarding some of the filing documents. While we encourage customers to file online through BizFile Online for faster processing, there are two documents used for nonprofit amendments that are only available to file as paper filings. These can be submitted via counter service at our office location at 1500 11th Street here in Sacramento, or through the physical mail. The Certificate of Amendment Nonprofit and Restated Articles of Incorporation, both of which we'll discuss momentarily, are free-form filings, meaning there is no template form available. However, the Secretary of State's website contains an information sheet for both filing types, which lists the information required on the filing, as well as a sample of a completed filing form. Additionally, the mailing address to submit the form via physical mail is listed on the sample cover sheet for each of the filings. A link to the Secretary of State's website homepage and the direct link to the page of our website containing those filing forms will be posted in the chat now. So moving on to the specific amendments, the first amendment type we'll address is a name change. A nonprofit entity can change the entity name by submitting a form called a Certificate of Amendment - Corporate Name Change Only -CA Nonprofit Corporation. And this is a form that can be filed online through your BizFile online account. An entity can file an amendment to change the entity type, meaning the nonprofit changes from one entity type to another. For example, a chess club may form as a mutual benefit to serve the members of the club, and over time, the membership may decide they'd rather use their funds to sponsor, let's say, youth who attend professional chess tournaments. After making this decision, they could change their entity type from mutual benefit to public benefit. And depending on the depth of the change, an entity needs to file either restated articles of incorporation to supersede the previous set of articles, or a certificate of amendment to update specific articles or statements. Depending on the nonprofit entity type, additional items may be required with the filing, such as a letter from the Attorney General's office. And on the forms page of our website, the Certificate of Amendment Nonprofit is form number 9, and the Restated Articles of Incorporation Nonprofit is form number 13. Again, these are only available as free-form paper filings, and we have a direct link to each sample form posted to the chat now. Now, using these same forms, an entity can file an amendment to revise their articles. If an entity would like a clean set of revised articles with all provisions spelled out, they may file a Restated Articles of Incorporation. This would, again, supersede the articles and replace them with an updated set. And just as a reminder, it would be a free-form paper filing you would submit. And finally, an amendment can be filed to change a specific provision. If an entity would like to change one or more specific provisions rather than changing all of them, such as modifying the purpose statement or their specific purpose, they may file a certificate of amendment to do so. And again, this would be a free-form paper filing. When you are filing either restated articles of incorporation or a certificate of amendment, we encourage an entity to review their previously filed articles of incorporation and any previously filed amendments or restated articles. The formatting and numbering of new filings must be consistent with any previous filings. And that will bring us to the final piece of my presentation, terminations, which is a word I will say very frequently for the next minute or so. Termination of nonprofit entities can be completed online through your BizFile online account. If the date of the termination filing is within 24 months of the formation date of the entity can file a termination short form to terminate. If the date of the termination filing is more than 24 months from the formation date of the entity can file an election to terminate and a standard termination form. It is important to remember that filing the election to terminate alone does not terminate the entity. You must also file the termination form to complete the termination. And please note that when terminating a nonprofit entity, certain additional items may need to be included with the filing. For example, a nonprofit public benefit or religious entity may need an approval letter from the Attorney General's office, but a mutual benefit entity does not. You may seek legal advice to determine if additional documents are required to complete your filing. And with that, my portion of the presentation has concluded. So thank you all for letting me share this information with you. At this time, I will turn it over to Katie with our Statement of Information team to continue.
Thank you so much, Chris. Good morning, everybody. My name is Katie Connors, and I work in the Statement of Information unit here at the California Secretary of State. Today, I will be sharing with you why a Statement of Information is filed and when it should be filed. So why do we need to file a Statement of Information? These statements are filed for a handful of reasons. The simplest is that California Corporations Code requires it. The statement is also filed to update the state and the general public with information pertaining to the entity, such as addresses and the names of officers. Other state agencies, as well as entities such as financial institutions, reference our website when processing their own filings. An example of this would be that many banks ask to see a copy of a current statement of information when you're opening a bank account. Failure to file the statement of information may result in a penalty being assessed or the entity falling under suspension. When the entity becomes suspended, it loses its rights, powers, and privileges in the state of California, including the use of its entity name. The initial statement is due to be filed within 90 days of formation. By formation, I mean the date the articles of incorporation were filed. And you can file that on our BizFile online website. Matthew is going to be dropping a link to our BizFile webpage, which is different than BizFile Online, which contains a link to a how to file a statement of information webinar that we put on. If you would like a step-by-step tutorial on how to create your BizFile Online account, as well as filing your statement of information. Next slide, please. So now that you have filed your initial statement of information, what is next? Your statement will be due again within the next applicable filing period, which consists of the month of formation and the immediately preceding 5 months. So whether the statement is filed in odd or even years depends on whether the entity was formed in an odd or an even year. We do recommend that you put your due date on a calendar, but we will send a reminder notice approximately 90 days prior to the due date. When you are filing your statement, you can tell us whether you want those notifications to come via email or in the form of a postcard from the post office. And if your address changes, please contact each of these agencies individually to make those updates. I do want to let you know that there is no communication between these agencies when it comes to updates of information. So you will be updating us all individually if you've got any changes. We also want to recommend that you regularly review your information on the BizFile Online website just to ensure that everything is current and accurate. Sometimes we lose track a little bit when we're only filing every other year, so we want to make sure everything's complete and accurate. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm going to turn things back over to Betsy.
Thank you, Chris and Katie, so much. Appreciate all the information that you shared this morning. One more thing, I am very excited about one of the achievements that we've done during Secretary Weber's administration is the implementation of the BizFile online portal that Chris and Katie mentioned. This is where you can do almost all your filings online through a secure system. You have the ability to control who accesses your online record, and you have the ability, as Katie mentioned, to opt into email reminders rather than the postcard reminders that sometimes don't make it to you. So that's a great feature that we've added. In addition, what I think is a very cool feature on our BizFile online portal is that you can order those certified copies and certificates of status for your entity online. As Katie mentioned, you can use those to secure business loans, enter into contracts, open bank accounts with your financial institutions. When you order these through your BizFile online portal account, typically you can get those within 1 to 2 minutes. It used to take days to get it on paper, but it will show up in your online account within minutes. So super excited and proud of our BizFile online portal that is now available to all of you. It has some great helpful hints in the help section with videos and guides to help you utilize. But if you ever have a need for help, our BizFile team is available through bizfile@sos.ca.gov to help you out. So you now have your California nonprofit corporation registered with the California Secretary of State. Now what? How do you become tax exempt? To help us with that, we will hear from our federal tax partner, Jeff Campbell, tax law specialist with the Internal Revenue Service Tax Exempt and Government Entities Division.
Thank you, Betsy. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast where I am, or good morning to you folks in California. I'm really happy to be able to be with you today. I want to thank the Secretary of State for putting this event together and for inviting the IRS to participate. We're always happy to reach out and hopefully get helpful information out to folks that are looking to participate in the tax exempt sector and contribute to all of the good that it can provide. You can go on to the next one. With the time that I do have today, I'm going to focus on two main points. I'm going to tie these through the whole thing. How do you go about obtaining tax exemption at the federal level, and how do you maintain that tax exemption? Obviously, this is going to be at a very high level, sort of introductory, if you will, but I'm going to note throughout the existence, throughout my time with you today, the existence of a very helpful and substantively deep resource that's available to all of you. Tool that will provide further depth to the high level points I'm going to cover today. That resource is called Life Cycle of an Exempt Organization, and it's available on our website at irs.gov. You're going to hear that repeatedly, but really want you guys to know that everything that I might say that might raise more questions than it answers, the answers are right there. Another point to bear in mind, I'm going to be talking about tax exemption from the federal standpoint. Requirements at the state and federal levels, they may overlap, they may differ entirely. So it's important to be mindful of both. Don't just assume that they are fungible. I've been dying to use that word lately. Mission accomplished. So with that, let's move on. Let's get into it. I'm going to focus primarily on the federal requirements as they pertain to 501c3 organizations. Judging by a lot of the questions that are coming in the text chat, that's a good call on my part, since that seems to be mostly what you guys are asking about. 501c3 organizations is just shorthand for organizations that are exempt under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. I might call them C3 organizations. I might just call them C3s, but that's what I'm talking about. The reason that I'm going to focus on these primarily is because, again, they're the most common. They're the most likely classification for a new tax exempt organization. But there are numerous other subsections under which an organization might qualify for tax exemption. When I want to cover something that's relevant to one of those other types of organizations, I'll be sure to make that clear. Otherwise, I'll be talking about C3s. So let's get into it. In order to be tax exempt under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code, an organization must be organized and operated exclusively for exempt purposes as set forth in 501c3. Exempt purposes for C3s, heard some of these earlier from at the state level, but they include purposes that are charitable, religious, educational, or scientific, among others, key among others. Going a little deeper into what constitutes charitable, that term is used in its generally accepted legal sense, and it includes, for example, relief of the poor, lessening the burdens of government, combating community deterioration, again, among others. There's not time to go through all of the possible exempt purposes or what constitutes charitable, so those are not exhaustive lists. But where can you go to find more information? The Charities and Nonprofits section of irs.gov. Another requirement, none of the organization's earnings may inure to any private shareholder or individual, and it cannot be an action organization. In other words, it cannot attempt to influence legislation as a substantial part of its activities, and it may not participate in any campaign activity for or against political candidates. That is a hard no for a C3. Section 501c3 organizations are also restricted and how much political and legislative lobbying activities they may conduct. For a detailed discussion on what is acceptable and what is not, again, irs.gov, there's a tab there for political and lobbying activities under the Charities and Nonprofits link. Organizations described in C3 are commonly referred to as charitable organizations. Organizations described in C3 other than testing for public safety organizations are eligible. to receive tax deductible contributions in accordance with Code Section 170. The organization must not be organized or operated for the benefit of private interests. Again, no part of the C3 organization's net earnings can inure to the benefit of any private shareholder or individual. If that happens, if it constitutes what's referred to as an excess benefit transaction, there can be an excise tax imposed on that. So be mindful. Moving on to the next slide, let's talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of actually applying for federal tax exemption. In order to apply to the IRS for recognition of exempt status under 501c3 of the code, you're going to want to use Form 1023 or a 1023 series application. There are a couple of different ones. The application must be submitted electronically on pay.gov, and it must include the appropriate user fee. Application process is laid out in detail again in that life cycle of an exempt organization feature on irs.gov. It's got a step-by-step discussion of what the organization needs to know to go through the application process. There's also a frequently asked questions section and various interactive tools available to help you through that process. Another thing to bear in mind, and this is going to be covered by one of my state colleagues a little bit later this morning, you should request an employer identification number even if you don't have any employees. The form you're going to want to use for that is the SS4, application for employer identification number, and you can access that by going to our website again. Except for churches, their integrated auxiliaries, public charities, any public charity whose annual gross receipts are normally less than $5,000, those organizations will not be treated as described in C3 unless they notify the IRS by applying for recognition under C3. What does that basically mean? You have to apply if you want to be a C3 unless you normally have gross receipts of less than $5,000. That's a small pool. Generally, organizations required to apply for that recognition have to do so within the first 27 months from the date of their corporate formation in order to be treated as exempt under C3. Once the IRS determines that the organization does qualify under C3, it'll be classified as either a private foundation unless it meets the requirements to be a public charity. I'll cover that in a little bit. A charitable organization has to make that application publicly available for public inspection, as well as any supporting documents that it had to submit with that application. Also has to make returns available to be inspected by the public, and failure to comply with that can result in penalties. On the next one there, Matthew, I said you need to fill out a 1023 series return. There is a simplified 1023 for smaller organizations that fall below certain asset and income thresholds, and that simplified application is the 1023EZ. If you're applying for exemption under C3, in order to fill out that 1023EZ, there's two things that have to be true. The organization's annual gross receipts can't exceed $50,000 in any of the prior 3 years, and or the projected annual gross receipts cannot exceed $50,000 in any of the next 3 years. And the organization also can't have total assets with a fair market value of more than $250,000. You satisfy both those, you can come in under a 1023EZ. If you do qualify to do the 1023EZ, I strongly recommend that you avail yourself of that. You will be glad that you did. Moving on, I said that I would draw attention anytime I left the friendly confines of 501c3 exemption. This is one of those times. I just said that you want to use a 1023 to apply for exemption under C3 or the 1023EZ for smaller organizations. What about other types of exempt organizations? If you're applying as a social welfare organization under C4, you're going to want to use the 1024A. If you're applying for exemption under Another paragraph of Section 501C, you'll want to use the Form 1024. All those forms are available on a website. I'll give you a little clue as to where it can be located. It starts with IRS, it ends with Gov. It's got a dot in the middle. On the next slide, I'm going to get to a little bit of a discussion about foundation classification. I'm realizing that I am taking longer to do this than I thought I would, so I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit quickly. Most organizations qualify as public charities, as I said. You can see here on the slide, a public charity generally has a broad base of support, as opposed to a private foundation, which generally receives its support, from a smaller number of large donors. Most common public charity classifications are 170B1A6. You don't need to remember the number, but that's a public charity which receives substantial support in the form of grants, contributions from government units, general public, and other public charities. There's also B1A5s, that would be governmental units, B1A3s, hospitals, again, among others. If the organization does not qualify as a public charity, then it's a private foundation by default. Private foundations are the default. On the next slide, so we have talked a little bit about how to obtain federal tax exemption and a little bit about the different classifications that come under that umbrella. Now I'm going to turn to the second prong of what I hope to focus on, obtaining that federal tax exemption. In general, exempt organizations at the federal level are required to file annual returns. Granted, there are some exceptions. These returns are commonly 990 series returns. I'll give you a little bit of detail on which one is which in a future slide, but for right now, it's enough to know that the orgs do need to file an annual return, and that's generally going to happen on the 990 series. If the organization doesn't file that return timely, there can obviously be penalties for that. And in addition, if an organization does not file as required for 3 consecutive years, it automatically loses its tax exempt status. Another important thing to note, just like I said with the applications, 990s have to be filed electronically. There are very few exceptions to that. The instructions for each respective 990 form has the requirements, or excuse me, the exceptions that may be available, but I wouldn't count on it. They are few and far between. On the next slide, you'll see what the different 990 series returns are. There's the Form 990 that's filed by organizations with gross receipts over 200,000 and assets less than 500,000. The 990EZ, I should have put these in a different order, I'm sorry about that, but the 990EZ, which inexplicably appears third in this list, that should be filed by organizations with gross receipts that are less than 200,000 and assets over $500,000. The 990PF should be filed by all private foundations. Remember I said there are 2 classifications, public charities and private foundations. Private foundations are kind of the default. This is the form for them. If you're a private foundation, you file the 990PF regardless of income or asset levels. Last, you're going to want to file the 990N if your gross receipts are normally less than $50,000. It's commonly referred to as the e-postcard. I was going to talk about due dates. I'm not going to talk about due dates. All of that information is available on the website. In general, though, barring except any extensions you might qualify for, 5 months and 15 days after, or yes, 5 months and 15 days after the close of the tax period is when that return is going to be due. We can move on to the next slide, Matthew. Really wrapping up. These next ones are going to be really quick. I know I've mentioned a number of times that all of these informational gems that I've shared with you are available on irs.gov. I'm going to show you exactly where to find them and how easy it is to get there. So this is a snapshot of our homepage. Right there on the top banner, you'll see that I've boxed and arrowed a link to charities and nonprofits. I want you guys to appreciate how important you are to us. Do you see a link in the top banner for large and mid-sized businesses? Do you see one for small business and self-employed? You don't. You do see one for charities and nonprofits. Couldn't be any easier. Once you click that, Next slide, please. Once you click on that link, you will land on this page, and here in the left-hand contents menu, you'll see life cycle of an exempt organization. If you click on that, you can move on to the next one, Matthew. Click on that. There's a menu that will expand, and you can see all the other options that become available. Information on applying for, maintaining exemption, annual filings, treatment of contributions. Each one of those pages is actually quite deep. Everything you're going to need to know to go from pulling everything together to apply in the first place to keeping your exemption intact for years to come, it is all available right there. On this next slide, there are several helpful links. Again, you can get to them by going to irs.gov, but I know Matthew's also going to drop these in the chat. I really do encourage you to check them out. There is quite literally a litany of information at your disposal at that site. With that, I am done. I did go 2 minutes over. Sorry about that to my fellow presenters. I want to thank you for your time and attention. I've really appreciated being able to meet with you today. And with that, I will hand it back to Betsy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that information and appreciate you as a partner to help our California nonprofits. So that's the federal tax exemption. Now let's move to our state tax partner. We have Audrey Rowe, nonprofit specialist from the California Franchise Tax Board.
Thank you, Betsy. Yes, I am Audrey Rowe from the Franchise Tax Board, and like many of my counterparts here today, I deal exclusively with nonprofit organizations. So I'd like to say to all of you, happy National Nonprofit Day. Very happy to be bringing this information to you, because the more information that you have, the easier time you're going to have complying with all of the many requirements. I'm going to basically take off or parallel what Jeff had mentioned for the California income tax exemption. I'm going to give a quick overview of how to apply for exemption, the filing requirements required to keep that exemption, how to check your status with our department online, and give you some pointers on what to do when things go wrong. Next slide. For starters, there's 2 ways to apply for California exempt status. And it's not based on the type of exemption you seek, but based on what has occurred with your organization in the past. So Form 3500A is essentially for those organizations that are fairly new. They've not had prior exemption with California. They've already obtained exemption with the IRS. They have that IRS determination letter that's effective around the time that they incorporated, and the exemption that they're seeking is under sections 501c3, C4, C5, C6, C7, and C19. For everyone else, there is the Form 3500. So for example, as Jeff had mentioned, churches and very small organizations that can self-declare with the IRS and not file that 1023, they'll have exemption, but they won't have received an exempt determination letter. Therefore, they do need to file the Form 3500 to get exemption in California. We do not have any automatic self-declaring provisions. Organizations that had prior exemption and it was revoked, usually for non-filing, will have to file the Form 3500 to reinstate. And then those organizations who maybe started operating but forgot all about exemptions and they exceeded that 27-month limit with the IRS, they'll receive a determination letter that's dated a more recent date and not their incorporation date. They should be filing exemption with California with the Form 3500 so that we can retroactively grant exemption back to their incorporation date. Now, currently, our forms are only available online, but we are in the works of updating our system to allow these forms to be filed online. That should be available early next year. Next slide. Now, the differences between the 3500 and 3500A kind of boils down to the amount of information that you need to provide. Because the 3500A is a piggyback of that federal exemption, you're being asked for very limited amount of information. It's only 2 pages long. You're going to be asked information such as what your address is, what your account period ending is, and the total income you receive per year. It does need to be signed by an officer or director of the nonprofit or a power of attorney representative, as long as that POA is filed with our department. You do need to attach a copy of that IRS determination letter. And when we approve it, we will issue a letter known as the exempt acknowledgement letter. It is tied to your federal exemption. So if you end up revoked with the IRS, the California exemption will also be revoked. In contrast, the Form 3500, very similar to the 1023 or 1024. It's a little bit longer. It's 5 pages. You have to describe the activities of the organization. You'll have to provide a schedule. That schedule is specific to the type of exemption you're seeking. So for example, if you're seeking exemption equivalent to a 501c3, you would fill out the Schedule 2. The entire package is rather large just because there are many, many types of exemptions that you can seek, but you only fill out the schedule that relates to your organization. It does need to be signed by an officer or director. Need to include attachments such as the articles, the bylaws, detailed financials, or if you're brand new, the proposed budget. We'll review the application, and when it's approved, we issue the exempt determination letter. That determination letter is considered a standalone exemption, meaning it is not tied to the federal exemption whatsoever. Next slide, please. Now, once you have your exemption, how you keep that exemption is that you generally will have to file. Now, it's very similar to the IRS. If your organization is a church or similar organization, such as a temple, a mosque, or a synagogue, it will be listed directly on your exempt acknowledgement letter or exempt determination letter that you are one of those, and therefore you don't have to file a return. But if it lists anything else, such as purely religious or charitable, you will have to file annually. Now, what you file annually depends upon how big or small you are. We only have 2 different forms. We only have 2 different forms. If you're a small nonprofit, gross receipts less than 50,000, very similar to the IRS, we have an e-postcard that is submitted online. We're only requesting information such as when your year begins, when your year ends, what your gross receipts are, and a little bit of information on the person who's submitting it so that we can contact you if we have any questions. In contrast, the Form 199 is a little bit longer. It's 2 pages plus schedules. It has very similar feel to filling out a tax return, except for the true benefit of exempt nonprofits is that you don't have to pay taxes on the income that you receive. You just need to file that form. Now, the 199 is for organizations with gross receipts above 50,000 and for all private foundations. We don't have an easy version. We don't have a PF version. It's just the 199. Next slide. Now, how you get to that and how you get more information about the filing is to go to our website. It is ftb.ca.gov. I strongly recommend you go to your computer and you bookmark that page because you will be going to it a lot. So once you're on the page, you do a search for charities and you land on our charities and nonprofits page. There's lots of information, so I'll kind of break it down based on what you're looking for. So for starters, for filing requirements, you're going to click on the link Annual and Filing Requirements. Once you click on that link, next page, you're going to find links to other agencies such as Secretary of State, IRS, Attorney General's Office that'll list their annual requirements. You'll find the link to download and fill in the Form 199. And you'll also find the link to file the 199N online. Now, unlike the IRS, the 199N is filed directly on our website. It's not taking you out to a third party. So when you click submit, you have met your filing requirement. Now, both the 199 and the 199N are free to file as long as you file it on time. If you are late in filing the 199, there is a small penalty of up to $40. If you are late in filing the 199N, there is no penalty, but if you are 3 consecutive years without filing that, you will end up having your exemption removed. Next slide. In addition to the filing requirements on our webpage, there's lots of other information. I know everyone is familiar with the 501c3 types, but you can actually find information on the other types of organizations to help choose what section you wish to see. For example, we've got a total of 22 different other types, including social clubs, business leagues, homeowners associations, and many, many more. So you can find that on the information related to how do you get your exemption. You'll find links to the forms 3500 or 3500A, including the instructions for both of those forms. You'll find a list of the nonprofits that have exemption revoked with our department. That is very important because there's a new law regarding online platforms such as Facebook or PayPal, that they're not permitted to allow nonprofits who are listed as a revoked status to be fundraising. So you definitely want to make sure you're not on that list. And if you are on that list, you definitely want to reach out to us to clear it. And then finally, there's a link for how to check your entity status online. Sorry, you would just click on the link called Entity Status Letter. You'll see it's the one with the little red arrow right there. You'll enter the entity's 7-digit corporation number or the entity's name, and you'll perform the search. And once you do search for your organization, you'll notice that the entity's corporation number is a little hyperlink. And if you click on that, you'll see this. Next slide. And it'll show you some details about your organization. Specifically, it'll show you if you are active or suspended, if you're exempt or not exempt. If you see anything other than active and exempt, you want to be reaching out to us to help clear that status and get you back on the right track. Now, here's a cool pro tip. If you are having an event, if you're having a fundraiser or something going on, pop onto our website, check to make sure you're active and exempt. And if you are, click on the link that says generate letter, and you'll produce a letter with today's date on it that says you're active and exempt. You can print that letter out, have it with you. And if any donors are questioning, what your status is, you can pull that out just to show them that everything is good. Next slide. Now for the scary part. What to do when things go wrong. No one likes to think about it, but it's actually quite common for nonprofits to end up not in good standing sometime during their life cycle. There's lots of reasons why, but the most common are that nonprofits are generally run by volunteers. And volunteers can be very, very good at running their programs, so they're not so good at handling the paperwork side of things. Another common situation is that if you have nonprofits that relate to children, sometimes the officers' children, once they age out of that program, the officers are going to also move on to other activities. And then finally, life circumstances very frequently get in the way. So an officer has an illness, or maybe they need to care for an aging parent, or maybe there's a worldwide pandemic that can cause them to lose track of all the filing requirements. And next thing you know, they have fallen behind and they've lost their exempt status. Around a third to a half of all the exemption applications we receive are for organizations that fell behind and are now trying to reinstate their exempt status. The number one reason for losing that exempt status is a suspension. Franchise Tax Board will suspend an organization for not filing that Form 199, for not paying a balance due, such as that $40 penalty. Secretary of State, as Katie mentioned, you'll end up with a suspended status if you don't file that statement of information. And with either of these suspensions, you're automatically going to lose your tax exemption. In addition to losing their tax exemption through a suspension, there are other ways you can. Now, I know that Katie mentioned that state agencies generally won't share information concerning changes of address or things like that, but we do have a sharing situation when things go bad. So if you end up suspended with the Secretary of State, they'll notify us and our system will revoke the organization. If you end up delinquent with the Attorney General's office, as you'll soon find out what their requirements are, the Attorney General's office will notify us. If you end up revoked with the IRS, we receive a monthly list from the IRS of California entities who've lost their exemption. So all of those things can cause a revocation with the Franchise Tax Board. Next slide, please. But regardless of what went wrong, our focus is to get you back into good standing, to get you back onto the right path. So the first question you might have is, well, how do I fix it? Step one should be to reach out to our department. We do have a nonprofit dedicated number. Don't worry about writing it down. It'll be posted in the chat. Calling our nonprofit helpline, we'll look at your status at the other agencies, and our staff will advise you on what you need to do to get back into good standing. Very commonly, it's going to be coming into compliance with the other state agencies, filing that form 3500. They'll let you know what returns are missing. They'll let you know any balances due. So once you get your exemption back, you are all caught up on everything. Effectively, you have a clean slate and you can just move forward from there. Next slide. Oh, back a slide. Back 2 slides. One more slide back. There we go. How to prevent these things from going wrong in the first place. Number one, check your mail. It's very, very common for nonprofits to set up a PO box, and then they'll forget to check that PO box, and all the notices that we send, they won't have received because maybe they're checking it every 2 to 3 months. Also, if you do receive mail from us and we're indicating a return is due or a balance due and you don't think you owe it, please reach out to us, because somewhere in our system, it's showing that you are missing something and it is due, and ignoring it is never the way to fix it. Next would be updating a change of address. It's fairly easy to do on your annual filing. If you list your new address, we automatically update your address. But for those organizations such as churches that don't have to file with us, the addresses we have on file could be decades old. So please definitely update your address with us. Next would be to regularly check that status online. I showed you how to do it on our website. Check your status maybe once a year, ideally right around the time that you're filing returns, to make sure you're in good shape. And then finally, maintain a binder. Keep track of what is owed, when it's owed, all of those key documents that your organization needs to keep on file, such as your articles and your bylaws. And then if you decide you no longer want to be part of the organization, hand it over to the next individual so that they can continue on without interruption. And last slide. Finally, my contact information. As promised, the last slide right here is the information on how to get directly involved with us. We do have a call center dedicated to nonprofits that's manned by actual live people, so you don't have to call 1-800 and go through the phone tree to get to any one thing. Our people are there. They can give you information on whether you're current. They can tell you what returns might be missing before you end up suspended, and they can walk you through how to get reinstated should you end up revoked. Thank you very much, and back to you, Betsy.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And I hope you guys are realizing that we are here for you. Although I know sometimes the tax agencies seem scary, they truly are here to help us comply, as is the Secretary of State and the other partners that we have on this webinar. But so now you have your nonprofit corporation, you have your federal and your state tax exemption. So now what? Are you an employer or going to be an employer? Next up, we have Helena Mamarian from the payroll tax specialist with the California Employment Development Department to help us through this part of the state obligations.
Thank you, Betsy. Yes, my name is Helena Mamorian, and I'm a payroll tax specialist with the Employment Development Department's tax branch. We appreciate this opportunity to have a chance to share information with you guys and a little bit more information about the services that we provide to the state of California. During this presentation, we will be focusing on employers' responsibilities pertaining to state payroll taxes, discussing the taxability of wages for nonprofit organizations, and also providing you guys resources to assist the employers with meeting these responsibilities. As you can see, we have the EDD website listed on the slide. All the information shared today can be found there, so you can visit edd.ca.gov. And another great resource we have is the number for our Taxpayer Assistance Center. We encourage you to contact the call center to answer any questions that you have regarding state payroll taxes. Staff are available Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific time. And now we will move on to what it means to become an employer. All right. So the EDD handles the audit and collection of payroll taxes and maintains employment records for California workers. Many of you might sit back and ask this question: when does an individual become an employer subject to paying state payroll taxes? All employers conducting business in California are subject to the employment tax laws of the California Unemployment Insurance Code. So once a business hires an employee and pays wages in excess of $100 during any calendar quarter, and I'll repeat that, pays wages in excess of $100 during any calendar quarter, the business is considered to be an employee and must register with the EDD within 15 days after paying wages. The employer can register online or via the appropriate registration forms. Specifically for nonprofits, it is the DE1NP. It is the employer's responsibility to properly classify their workers and payments for services performed. Now we'll go on to the next slide, which covers the state payroll taxes. All right, as you guys can see on the slide here, we have a little bit of a breakdown for you guys in indicating who pays what taxes and who's responsible for all of that. So we have 4 state payroll taxes which the EDD administers. That is the unemployment insurance, the employment training tax, the state disability insurance, and the personal income tax. Subject employers are responsible for reporting wages paid to employees, paying the unemployment and employment training tax on those wages, and withholding and remitting the state disability insurance and personal income tax. Now we'll go into a little bit more detail. Unemployment insurance, UI, provides temporary payments to individuals who are unemployed through no fault of their own. The unemployment insurance program is funded through payroll taxes paid by the employer. Tax-rated employers pay a percentage on the first $7,000 in wages paid to each employee in the calendar year. New employers pay a 3.4% for a period of 2 to 3 years, and that maximum UI rate can go up to 6.2%. Employment training tax provides funds to train employees in targeted industries to improve the competitiveness of California businesses. ETT is an employer-paid tax. Employers subject to ETT pay 0.1% on the first $7,000 paid to each employee in a calendar year. Moving to state disability insurance. This allows the disability fund to pay disability insurance and paid family leave benefits to eligible claimants. The SDI program is funded through a payroll deduction from the employee's wages. Employers withhold 1.1% of SDI on wages paid to each employee in the current calendar year. Effective January 1st, 2024, Senate Bill 951, they removed the taxable wage limit and maximum withholdings for each employee subject to SDI contributions, so there is no wage limit. Personal income tax is the final tax, and it's levied on the income of California residents and income of that of non-California residents derived within California. EDD administers the reporting, collection, and enforcement of the personal income tax wage withholding, and employers withhold California PIT from their employees' wages based on their Form W-4 and or their DE-4. There is no taxable wage limit or maximum tax for personal income tax. Now let's discuss how subject employers will report and remit those payroll taxes. Next slide, please. All right, so e-services for business. All employers are required to electronically submit their employment tax returns, wages, wage reports, and payroll tax deposits to the EDD. To comply, employers can use the e-service for business. E-service for business allows employers and their representatives to manage their employer payroll tax accounts online with access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. E-services provides many convenient features such as registering, closing, or reopening an employer payroll tax account. You can file, adjust, and print your payroll returns. You can make payments, and you can also view and update business names, entity types, addresses, and more. As mentioned before, it's very important that you update your address, and it is not transferred through other agencies. You do have to come to EDD and update that address. And for your convenience, we do have the link for EDD's e-service for business website on the slide. And feel free to review the webpage for more information. And it is important to consistently monitor this account, even if you have a payroll reporting agency or someone that is processing your payroll. We do encourage that every employer goes on their own time and make sure everything is going accordingly and correctly. Now we're going to move to registering for nonprofit entities and how to do so. All right, so types of nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit organizations described under Section 501c3 of the IRC include, but are not limited to, religious and charitable organizations, social welfare organizations, charitable and scientific organizations, and social and recreational clubs. Now, if we can go to the next slide, we will talk about the taxability of wages for nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit entities are subject to unemployment insurance, employment training tax, state disability insurance, which includes paid family leave, and state personal income tax withholdings. However, nonprofit entities have an exemption under Section 501c3 of the IRC have a choice in the method of financing their unemployment costs. Now, moving to the next slide, we will provide some examples of the financing methods. A nonprofit entity may elect to pay the same unemployment insurance taxes under the same method as a commercial employer, which is considered the experience rating method, or reimburse the state for the full cost of all UI benefits paid to their former employees, which is the reimbursable method. Now, the employer must file a selection of financing method by a nonprofit organization described in Section 501c3 of the IRC, which is our DE1 SNP form. The CUIC, which is the California Unemployment Insurance Code, provides that nonprofit organizations exempt from personal income tax under Section 501A as an organization described in Section 501c3 of the IRC may elect to reimburse the UI fund for the cost of benefits paid rather than being assigned that tax rate and paying under the contribution rate method. So when we move on to the next slide, we will go into a little bit more detail on the differences and details of the tax-rated method and the reimbursable method. Tax-rated employers pay a percentage on the first $7,000 in wages paid to each employee in a calendar year. As mentioned before, a new employer pays 3.4% for a period of 2 to 3 years. After that, an employer's contribution rate is determined annually by the employer's experience rating and the condition of the unemployment insurance fund. And as mentioned, that can go to a maximum of 6.2, or it could be less than 3.4. And that would, again, be determined by the experience rating and the condition of the UI fund. If we go now to the next slide, we'll talk about the reimbursable method. A nonprofit organization may elect to reimburse the EDD for the cost of the unemployment insurance benefits. The employer must reimburse the EDD on a dollar-for-dollar basis for benefits paid to former employees. Election must remain in effect for at least 5 complete calendar years. The employers will remain liable to reimburse the unemployment insurance benefits for up to 3 calendar years after terminating the election. So it's important to know that an election of the cost of benefits method must remain in effect for not less than 5 complete calendar years for a nonprofit, or 2 complete calendar years for a public entity or Indian tribe. Okay, now we will discuss electing the reimbursable method. Nonprofit employers must file, in order to elect, a form called the DE1 SNP, as well as the DE1 NP. And so those two are listed on the slides over here for you guys to see. If the DE1 SNP is filed at a later date, it will be effective the first date of the quarter in which it's filed. As much of the same as tax agencies, it's important for you to remember the dates that are filed, because that will indicate the start and effective date of your tax rating method. So you want to make sure to make note of that and keep that for your records. All right, if we can move on, we will talk about the specialized coverages for excluded services. Under provisions in the California Unemployment Insurance Code, employers may elect unemployment insurance and or state disability insurance, SDI coverage for their exempt employees. Employment Development Department refers to these elections as specialized coverage. Specialized coverage requirements are that the request must be in writing and filed with and approved by the EDD. The election must remain in effect for at least 2 complete calendar years unless the election is for a minor child. If the elected coverage for a child terminates on the child's 18th birthday, then the child becomes mandatorily subject to both unemployment and state disability. Specialized coverage termination requests, as mentioned, must be in writing and filed with an EDD during the month of January. Termination will come into effect on January 1st of the same year, only if 2 complete calendar years have passed since the effective date of the election. So again, just to remind you, it must be in writing, it must be filed with the EDD and approved, and you want to keep note and mindful of those dates. And now we will go to the next slide and we will discuss a little bit about the special exclusions. A church, convention, or association of churches, an organization operated primarily for religious purposes and is controlled and supported by a church, services by a duly ordained, commissioned, or licensed minister or member of religious order, services for specific rehabilitation programs by a participant in the program. Now, these are examples of special exclusions. The services provided to these entities are exempt from unemployment insurance, employment training tax, and SDI, state disability insurance. However, all services are subject to personal income tax. And keep in mind that the entities can, as mentioned before, elect to have specialized coverage for their employees. So if you would like to opt into the unemployment or the state disability and the employment training tax, you can elect for coverage for these individuals. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. Our wonderful slide for resources. Now, starting from the top, the California's Employer Guide DE44 is your one-stop shop for all of EDD's payroll tax information. Some people like to call it the Employer's Bible. All the information that you need is there, and you can request this DE44, and you can download it, or you can request that the EDD sends it to you by mail, free of charge. If you have employment tax related questions, you can also contact our Tax Assistance Center or visit the EDD's website for additional information and resources. We also encourage you guys to attend one of our virtual no-cost employment tax seminars. We have 5 seminars that are currently being offered, which is the Federal/State Basic Payroll Tax Seminar, the State Labor Law and Payroll Tax Seminar, which is we work with the IRS to go ahead and provide that for you guys. Then we have the State Basic Payroll Tax Seminar, the Employment Status Tax Seminar, and the Cannabis Industry and State Payroll Tax Seminar. So we encourage you guys to get these registrations and go to our website to register for these free seminars. And the DE-231 is the employment information sheet. Here is where we discuss employment in general, who is an employer, the ABC and the Borello test to determine employment status. And we have numerous information sheets covering a wide variety of topics, including industry-specific employment determination. You will also find our nonprofit or public entities information sheet with the DE-231NP to go over specialized coverage for exempt workers. And we do have the information sheet specialized coverage, DE-231SC. We have compiled the resource list, and we will be sharing that with you guys in the chat box for you to download those necessary documents. And one final thing that I would just like to read over to you guys is our final slide. And I just want to remind you guys that any information provided is not intended to be legal, accounting, tax, or investment or other professional advice. It is purely informative and to better assist you guys. And with that, I would like to say thank you and give it back over to Betsy.
Thank you so much, Valena. This is great information and so appreciated. So now, is your nonprofit a charity, or will your nonprofit be fundraising? To help these questions be answered, we have Office of the Attorney General.
Thank you, Betsy, and good morning, everyone. So you've heard from my colleagues from other government agencies about how to form charities, obtain tax exempt status, and also about how to be an employer. And now it's my turn to share with you how the California Attorney General's office fits into the charity operations. Next slide. Oh, that's the current slide. Before I jump into the charity registration and reporting requirements, I'll briefly touch on the Attorney General's broader authority, which among his authority includes registration and reporting responsibilities. But I wanted to kind of touch on his broader authority that he has. And the reason that he has a broader authority over charities or the nonprofit sector in the state is because charitable benefits or charitable assets are meant for the people of the state of California, who are the ultimate charitable beneficiaries. And because the people of the state of California are indefinite in number, there's no one usually available who's willing to assume the burden of a legal action and represent the public interests. And as a result, the Attorney General has been given this responsibility. As you can see here, the Attorney General's jurisdiction extends to many different types of nonprofit corporations and also to for-profit corporations, which are generally the fundraising professionals. And he also has jurisdiction over charitable trusts and for any bequests that come through wills and trusts. In the next few slides, I'll share the registration and renewal requirements. And these requirements are enforced through the Attorney General's Registry of Charities and Fundraisers. And I may refer to the registry by its shortened name, the registry, going forward. To legally operate in California, charities must register with the Attorney General's registry. A charity must register within 30 days of receiving property to be used for charitable purposes. And property does not just mean cash. It could also mean, or it could also be donated office supplies, for instance, or donated clothing. It could be funds that were used to start a charity in the first place, or gift from a will. So these are all examples of property that may be donated for charitable purposes, and they trigger the registration requirement. So how do you register with the Attorney General's registry? You download the fillable initial registration form, which we refer to as the CT1 form. You complete it, you sign it, and you include the $50 initial registration fee by check or money order. You include a copy of the charity's founding documents, and you also include the IRS documents that we request here, and you send it all to the registry at the address indicated on the top of the CT1 form. Once you make the submission to initially register, the staff at the registry will review them and confirm to see whether all required documents and fees have been submitted. At that point, if everything looks good, the registry will send a confirmation letter. That confirmation letter will indicate the registration number that's been assigned to the charity. And that's the number that you will need to use going forward to, for instance, renew your registration. And that registration confirmation letter will also remind the charity of the renewal obligations that I'll discuss in a few minutes. We have resources available to help charities to register. You go to oag.ca.gov. Matthew, could you put that in the chat, please? And when you go to oag.ca.gov and you click on the heart, that'll take you directly to the charity page of the AG's website. And from there, to initially register, you click on the link for initial registration and you choose your your menu of resources that we have available for you. And one helpful one that I want to highlight here is the webinar on initial registration. Next slide, please. So many charities conduct raffles to fundraise. And one of the important points that I want to make here is that raffle registration is separate from the charity registration that I just discussed. I also want to emphasize that only an eligible nonprofit organization, not a for-profit entity or an individual, may conduct a raffle. And the reason is a raffle is a lottery. It's a form of gambling. So a narrow exception was created in the Penal Code section for tax-exempt charities to fundraise through raffles. So if your charity wants to conduct a raffle, please go to the Attorney General's webpage on nonprofit raffles to learn about the registration and reporting requirement related to them. Next slide, please. So I was informed that the audience today would be mainly charities and charity representatives. And so I'm just going to very briefly touch on fundraiser registration requirements. So we have many types of charitable fundraisers that are operating in California. And they also need to register and report to the Attorney General's office. I provide a very brief description of what they need to do if you're a fundraising registration or a fundraising professional. And the very a new category of professional fundraiser that we have in the state is called the Charitable Fundraising Platform. And I also briefly mentioned that on this PowerPoint slide. Next slide, please. So now that your charity is registered, what do you do next? What do you do for each year that the charity is in operation after registering with the AG's office? What you have to do is you have to renew your registration, and you have to do this annually. And the reason for this is because charities are given tax-exempt status. They must operate with transparency and accountability because you're operating with donated public funds or public grants, or based on your charitable services revenue. And so there's an obligation to provide reports that the public could look at, the public could see, to make informed decisions about giving. So how do you renew your registration? To renew your registration, you must file the annual renewal registration form, and that is called RRF-1. And with that, you have to give us the IRS Form 990 that you filed with the IRS and pay the renewal fee. The renewal fee is based on a sliding scale, and it depends on the charity's revenue of the reporting year. If a charity, for instance, filed a 990N because its revenue for the reporting year was under $50,000, the 990N provides very little information to the donating public. And so as a result, if you fall into that category, to renew your registration, you would have to file the RRF-1 form and file CTTR1 form, which is a one-page form that gives a very broad picture of your financial information about the charity. So when do you need to renew your registration? To renew registration, you need to do so by May 15 if you're operating on a calendar year, or by November 15 if your fiscal year runs from July 1 to June 30. Jeff spoke from the IRS about the filing deadline of May 15. I think a good practice would be to file with the IRS your Form 990, then turn around and file that 990 with the RRF-1 form with the Attorney General's office, and now you're done with your filing requirements for the year. I would advise all charities not to wait until May 15 or November 15, because those 2 months are the busiest times of the year at the registry when they receive upwards of 20,000 pieces of mail coming in. So what happens if a charity does not renew its registration? And even after we're accounting for the IRS extension of time of 6 months, if the registry does not receive the renewal filings, and we also honor IRS extensions, and subsequent to that, we recognize after processing all the filings that the renewal documents were not received as to your charity, then the charity status becomes delinquent. Please remember that in California, only charities in good standing with the Attorney General's registry may operate and solicit donations. I have resources listed here for you if you need help renewing your charity registration. Next slide, please. So the next two slides, I'm going to step away from talking about registration and reporting, and I want to call your attention to certain transactions that require notice to the AG's office, and some of them may even require consent from the Attorney General's office before you finalize a transaction. For instance, if your charity seeks to merge with another entity, amend the articles of incorporation to convert from one form of charity to a different type, if you intend to sell all or substantially all of the assets, or you plan to make loans of charitable assets, or you plan to dissolve, then please review the guide on the nonprofit transactions on the Attorney General's website. Next slide, please. I mentioned that the Attorney General of California has broad authority over charities, and he exercises those authority over the nonprofit sector through the registry, but he also does that through the charitable trust section. The charitable trust section is charged with investigation and enforcement, and when we are investigating, we are looking for fraud, we're looking for diversion or misuse of assets, and misrepresentations by charities and fundraisers, because our job is to protect charitable assets that are meant for the people of California. Next slide, please. I've listed some helpful resources here for you, but they're also available by going to oag.ca.gov and clicking on the heart. Thank you, and back to you, Betsy.
Great, and thank you to all of our experts today. This has been a lot of helpful information to process. Don't fret, recordings of this workshop will be posted on the California Secretary of State's website at bizfile.sos.ca.gov once they are ready. You will also find at that same website that our prior workshops that we've had are posted there already. And in addition, as participants and registrants today, we will send you a link via email to this recording. So stay tuned and watch it, share it, and let's get right into some questions and answers. Again, if you have specific questions about your entity, please direct those directly to the agency. But let's get a couple questions going. First one to the Secretary of State. How do I release my corporation from a suspension from the Secretary of State's office?
I can field that one. If your entity becomes suspended by the Secretary of State, you will remedy that by filing an updated statement of information. I do want to let you know that suspension is not going to lift off immediately. Please give us 3 to 5 business days to get that lifted. We've got a little bit of homework we've got to do.
Great, thank you. Next to Jeff at the IRS. If I have contractors, do I still need an EIN?
Still need an EIN because it's what IRS uses as the taxpayer identification number. So in order to apply and get recognized, that is the number that you're going to be filed under. So yes, short answer, you need it.
Thank you. Audrey from the Franchise Tax Board. If my nonprofit doesn't have tax exemption, but I don't have any income, am I still taxed?
So in California, there is the $800 minimum franchise tax for every corporation formed or registered in California, unless they're exempt. So yes, you'll still be assessed that $800. So even though you're not pulling in income, I strongly recommend you apply for exemption.
Thank you. And Jeff, same question from the IRS perspective.
It cut out on me. I'm sorry. Could you?
Sure. The question is, if my nonprofit doesn't have tax exemption, but I don't have any income, am I still taxed?
If you don't have any income, then there's nothing to tax. If you are tax exempt, again, as long as it wasn't what's called unrelated business income, then you wouldn't be taxed anyway.
Okay. EDD, Helena, when do I need to register with the Employment Development Department? If you could go over that again.
Yes. So when you pay any employee or worker for their services greater and in excess of $100, you are required to file within 15 days of paying those wages. So anything in excess of $100, then you have 15 days.
What's the time frame for your department to process the initial registration form?
Initial registration form is, I think, is processed quicker than, say, for instance, an entity that's renewing or trying to clear delinquency. The initial registration program would need to just review the documents, the application that's submitted, review that the founding documents are attached, that tax exempt status was granted, and also the right amount of initial registration fee was attached. And so I would say anywhere from 30 to 60 days.
Okay, so whoever asked that question, I'd reach out directly. They said it's been 4 months, so I would recommend that you reach out to find more information. They are
Yeah, I would also recommend, because
dissolving.
I would also recommend that because there's a way to, maybe the registry staff already reached out and you didn't get our notice, but if that happened, we also put notes into the search page. The charities that are trying to register has an application number, and we will put notes in there about what happened, what was incomplete about your submission. So if that is another way for you to check to see what the status is. So it could be that there was, you missed our communication, because we will reach out if something is missing, that your submission was incomplete. And that is a way for you to communicate back to us and submit what's required.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. We're about 2 minutes left. And so thank you all for all the great questions that we received. It's fantastic. Obviously, we didn't get to everybody's questions, but don't fret. We will send the questions to the different representatives and gather responses for you and provide those via the email that you registered for the event. We'll also be following up with a survey. So gather your input on how we can improve these workshops and what content you would like to see provided to nonprofit organizations in the near future so that we can meet your needs. We hope that you found this workshop helpful, and we thank you again for all the work that you do for Californians. Have a great day, and thank you again for joining us. Take care.